Good morning. Tori Lang was the 18-year-old daughter of Teresa and Tori Lang, originally in New Orleans, Louisiana. She was a recent graduate of Stevenson High and, by all accounts, a bright, effervescent, beautiful young woman. I did not have the pleasure of knowing her, and her mother and her grandmother are far better equipped than I to tell you about Tori when she was alive. The last time Tori was seen in their neighborhood, leaving the area in which they lived, was about 10:30 on July 27th of 2021. She was seen on a neighbor's ring cam video leaving the area in her car. As far as Teresa and Tori knew, she just did not come back. There was just a sheer coincidence. Teresa was changing the family's cell phone account. So she had Tori's cell phone in order to port the number over from one carrier to another. So they couldn't call Tori. The following morning, Tori still didn't come home. So they reached out to her friends, or the people at least she thought were her friends. One of the people who Teresa reached out to was the defendant, Austin Ford. Austin told Teresa he hadn't seen Tori, didn't know where Tori was, but vowed that he'd look for her, and that if he heard anything, he'd let her know. He never let her know. Simultaneously, at about 6:33 in the morning, July 28th, Theodore Young and his wife were taking their morning walk in Yellow River Park. Mr. Young is an older gentleman, will go through the park and pick up cans, goes walking early in the morning. It was August, so it's probably going to be really, really hot. I'm sorry, July. Still hot. He sees what appears to be a person lying under a tree. He gets closer, and what he finds is the body of a young woman who has been shot one time in the head. Mr. Young called to her to see if she was still alive, noticed that she was not. Police. Officers with the Gwinnett County Police Department, specifically then Officer Casey Smith and Officer Remy, responded to the scene. They're both uniformed patrol officers. Officer Smith was training Officer Remy. And they did what patrol officers are supposed to do. They assessed the scene, determined that there was more things that they could handle, noted what they could note, and waited for detectives who would do a more thorough investigation of who this young woman might be and what might have happened to her. They did, the patrol officers, Officer Remy and Officer Rachel Lasky, did locate 2 shell casings. They didn't do anything with the shell casings. What they did was just mark them first with a piece of paper so that they would not be disturbed, so other officers would know not to step on them, kick them, or otherwise disturb what could be crucial evidence in whatever happened to this young woman who was found here dead. They then turned the scene over to detectives. The initial responding detective was then Corporal David Smith. Now, what happens after the evidence is marked and what's there is roped off by the patrol officers? crime scene investigation and the medical examiner are called. The crime scene investigation, or CSI, with Gwinnett County will take measurements of the scene. They will collect the shell casings, photographs, videos to document the scene so that detectives will have all the information that is available in order to solve what is now apparently a case. The only physical evidence that CSI was able to locate was the 2 shell casings. They did not find any vehicle that appeared to be hers. They went so far as to have a police academy class basically canvass the entire area, lined up side by side, walked the entirety of the park, because as you'll see, it's ultimately a very large area. But they didn't find anything. All we've got from the scene is 2 shell casings. I'll talk to you a little bit about the shell casings later. They then turned the investigation over to the detectives. Or, I'm sorry, over to the medical examiner. Medical examiner's office came and they do what they're supposed to do. The medical examiner's role is to examine the remains of the young lady and to make a determination of cause and manner of death. That is done through collecting observations at the scene and through an autopsy. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Carol Terry. I don't think I need to explain exactly what an autopsy is, but that took place on July 28th of 2021 and into July 29th of 2020. Now mind you, at this time, as far as the police, the medical examiner know, this is an unknown young woman. She didn't have any ID. There was, at this time, no way to tell just who she was. She did have photos, she did have tattoos, and so officers were able to take pictures of her tattoos in hopes to identify her. The medical examiner, Dr. Terry, did make certain observations relating to and did make a ruling on the cause of death. What Dr. Terry will testify to is that she was killed by a single gunshot to the head that occurred from 10 to 12 inches away. Now she can tell that by the manner in which the bullet entered Tori's head and by other physical traces that were left by the shot itself. She is, again, far better equipped to tell you about that than I am, but essentially you can tell to a point how far away a gun is fired. By, if it was very close up, there would be stippling burning. If it's further, there are powder burns. And if it's even further out, there are none of those things present, and so the range would be undetermined. But in this case, Dr. Terry was able to determine that it was between 10 to 12 inches away from Tori's head. She determined that Tori was lying in the place that she was found when she was shot. Which ultimately does mean that the location of the gun at the time it was fired can be extrapolated. Though, because of what was there, what was not there, Dr. Terry was not able to make a determination about the manner of death. So the manner of death in this case is undetermined. But keep in mind, this ruling, this report, and this determination were made on the 29th of July. Meanwhile, at some point, members of Tori's family are able to identify her tattoos by a photograph that have been put out into the news media. And the young woman who officers found in the park now has a name, Tori Lang. Corporal Smith goes to speak with the Lang family and notify them that their daughter has in fact been located and what has happened to her. They also learn that Teresa's Sig Sauer P365 is no longer in her home. Armed now only with this, the investigation continues on. They continue to speak to Tori's friends. They continue to gather information. Due to promotion and just the natural shuffling of the police department, Corporal Smith was promoted and a different detective was assigned to the case, Detective Angela Carter. She continues the investigation from where Corporal Smith picked up. Now, one thing Corporal Smith did find before he turned the case over to Detective Carter was that where Austin Ford lived, his neighbor had a ring camera. The ring camera captured Tori coming over to Austin's house around 10:40 p.m. on July 27th. It later captured them leaving together shortly thereafter. And you can see that Tori appears to be wearing the clothes in which she's found when she is leaving with the defendant. The ring camera later catches the defendant coming home, maybe about 1:40 in the morning, wearing something different. Detective Carter speaks to the defendant by phone, and he continues to, I'll just say it, lie. He does not admit that he was with Tori that night. He doesn't admit that he was at Yellow Park. He does not admit that he knew what happened to Tori. Mind you, this was a friend of hers, supposedly. This was supposed to be a friend. This is a young man who her mother knew her to associate with. A man who, when she was looking for Tori and worried, she thought that this supposed friend would know where she was, would be helpful in finding her, and maybe alleviate her fears that something terrible had happened to her daughter. That's not what he did. He just said, I don't know where she is, and pretended to look for her. But he knew where she was. He went to her funeral, hugged her mother, knowing all the while exactly what had happened to Tori. I'll explain more. He did mysteriously skip the vigil that the family held shortly after Tori's murder at the park, at the location of her death. The defendant, though notified, though supposedly her friend, he didn't go to that. But Detective Carter's investigation also involved getting the defendant's cell phone records and his geolocation through Google. One thing a lot of people don't know about Google is Google tells on you. Google tells on you a lot. If you have a Google app on your phone, it is reporting to Google what your location is. Now, the purpose of this is Google's, and it has to do with advertising and making sure that you get relevant ads, because businesses pay money to have their ads put in front of you. And if I am standing at 75 Langley Drive, a business somewhere near 75 Langley Drive might want to show me an ad so that while I'm here, I can patronize their business. So using a search warrant, we were able to get those records, along with his phone records. They show a couple of things. What they show is Austin Ford's phone bouncing off of cell towers near Yellow River Park around the time he left his apartment with Tori on the Ring camera. Then it stops. There's no more pinging, no more nothing. Which would indicate that the phone is no longer sending a signal out. Well, how would a phone not send a signal out? Because you turn it off. The phone then reappears after 1 in the morning, moving at a rate that is faster than one could walk. What does that mean? Well, that means that he wasn't walking, he was probably in a car. It's simply a matter of if you're at, because it doesn't follow you like a little video where you see the dot moving on the map like they do in the phone TV. That's TV. It shows locations and times. And you can calculate the speed it takes to travel between the two locations if you're given the times. And Detective Carter was able to determine that he had to be moving faster than at a pace that someone would walk. Plain and simple. Detective Carter, now armed with this information about his phone records, about his geolocation, the fact that he did not call Tori after she was killed, his supposed best friend, his alleged friend who is lying dead in Yellow River Park, who has told his mother, her mother, I'm going to help you look for her, I'm going to help find her. But he doesn't call her, not one time. Not because he knew about recording of the cell phone number and where Tori's phone actually was, but because he knew she wasn't going to answer. So armed with this information, Detective Carter interviews the defendant in person. And for the first part of the interview, he continues on with the same line of reasoning and story that he has perpetuated from the beginning. He tries to cast off responsibility for Tori's death onto Scoop. You'll find out Scoop was, I cannot remember his name right now, but he was Tori's sometime boyfriend. Agent Carter was able to determine Detective Carter was able to determine that he was somewhere else at the time. But the defendant keeps bringing him up, keeps trying to cast aspersions onto him. And he continues to do that throughout the beginning of the interview. At some point, Detective Carter confronts him with the information that she had. I know your cell phone was outside the other. I know you were with her that night. I know that you left, and it was probably in her car, because you were moving faster than you could have been moving if you were walking. The defendant now changes his story. What he tells Detective Carter is that he was with Tori the night of the 27th. That she came to his house despondent and suicidal. That they went to Yellow River Park and he saw that she had her mother's gun. He says they talked in the park, that she told him she was going to hurt herself, that he took the gun from her, placed it on the ground, gave her a hug, that she pushed him away, grabbed the gun, and shot herself in the head. That's the story that he told Detective Clark. He continued on into that he was scared. So he took the gun. He took her car. The gun he disposed of by throwing it in a pond somewhere in DeKalb County. Divers checked the pond, couldn't find the gun, but it was a year after he threw the gun in the pond that they were finally able to check. But the gun was never found. But it wasn't on the scene, which is important. He took her car, and his description was that he parked it in the cut. That's a slang term, an alley, just kind of an out of the way place. So he parked the car somewhere, and then he just went back home. The car was found August 1st in a nature preserve in DeKalb County, burned to the frame. Now, unfortunately, there was no evidence that was able to be recovered from the car. It was so completely burned, there's not really a way to determine whether or not even an accelerant was used. But the car was essentially burned down to the frame. This is a murder. Now, Dr. Terry is going to tell you that the manner and cause of death is undetermined. But she made that ruling and that determination on July 29th, 2021, without being a party to or privy to the cover-up, or attempted cover-up, by the defendant, without knowing that the car was burned, without knowing any of the other information that was gathered afterwards. Now, some of that has been given to her, and that would not necessarily change her ruling. But this is why we have Dr. Terry's determination of manner of cause or death is not what determines whether or not somebody is guilty of murder. That is the 14 Murder in Georgia, as charged, is felony murder, is committing a felony during which the death of another is caused. Well, the notion that Tori picked up a gun off the ground and shot herself in the side of the head 10 to 12 inches away in such a way that it severed her brainstem, which would have stopped her movement, functioning, heartbeat, breathing, almost instantly, while laying down, is far-fetched. The only reasonable way this could have happened involves this defendant's hand on a firearm, which is a deadly weapon. And to point a firearm at another person is aggravated assault. There are other charges on the indictment, voluntary manslaughter and 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. The top 2 counts, though, ten to 12 inches away, everybody knows what a foot is. It's just not a common way to commit suicide. It's, as described by the defendant, just unlikely. It's also contradictory to the physical evidence found by Dr. Terry. Those findings, those physical findings, those are important. The fact in particular that she was where she was when she was shot, because that determines where the firearm was. And those are facts. When you look at the situation as a whole, after hearing the evidence from the stand, after seeing video, after seeing photos, I'm going to come back and ask you to find this defendant guilty, in particular, of felony murder and aggravated assault. Because the state will have proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's just what it sounds like, a reasonable doubt. It's not a burden the state shies away from. It's not a burden that the state is scared of, afraid of, or feels the need to over-explain to you, but one that it proudly picks up and says, this murderer is guilty of murder. Look at him cover up his murder.
All right,